Um, oh, I have to click this on. Okay. So I don't know if I can provide any insight on this, but maybe among the group that's gathered here today, maybe there's some questions relating to everything that happened in Nepal, and that maybe I could shed a little bit of light on. Maybe not, but if there was any questions that you had, if I had the ability to answer it, I will. If not, I'll just say that's that's above my pay grade. Any comments or questions about all the events that we've been informed about since Kebje Rinpoche showed the aspect of breathing his last in Nepal, and I believe that was April 13th. So I think we're now on the what are we now, on the 21st day, something like that. So if you think of something that you think I might be able to shed a little light on, please ask. But now, to turn to the subject matter for this evening, this entire series was meant to be focused on symbolism. So, for example, some of you were here, I can't remember how many weeks or months ago it was, when we had a talk together, an exploration of the throne on which the Buddha sits, and explain the symbolism of that. Among the people who are here today, were any of you attending that one? I can't remember how long ago it was, but it's more than a month, maybe probably more than 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, it's quite a while ago, but yes, we were there.
Yeah. So 1 or 2 people from the 6?
Almost everybody was.
Oh,
Laura?
everyone?
I think everyone was. They're all muted, and maybe they haven't unmuted, but it seems to me that Laura was there. John would have been there. I think Mary Jo was. I think everybody was.
Oh, okay, good. One problem I'm having is I can see myself quite well, and I can see Mary Joan and Eloise, and I can't see the name of who's sitting next to Eloise.
It's Adrian.
Adrian. But those are the only ones I see on my screen. I wonder if I can make it larger to view more people. Oh, now John is appearing, Willis, and Laura Gilligan. Yeah, and Willis, next to you, it doesn't have the name of the person you're sitting next to. Oh, you're still muted, Willis.
It's Patty, if he doesn't come off.
Okay, Patty.
Yeah, Patty.
Okay. Now I can see you. I was on a kind of a truncated screen. That's why I only saw a few of you. So just very, very briefly to summarize, the Shakyamuni Buddha and many of the other figures that we refer to as meditational deities, figures that we use in our meditation to make a connection with the various qualities of enlightenment, such as compassion and wisdom and so forth. They are shown seated on a specially prepared seat. And there's quite a lot of symbolism involved in it, but in a very abbreviated way. The seat indicates what the path was that that figure followed in order to achieve this state of awakening or enlightenment. So typically, those of you who have received teachings on the three principal aspects of the path, which is a major Lamrim topic, and Lama Tsongkhapa thought about it extensively. Those three, the seat, in part symbolizes those three principal aspects of the path. It's the three principal aspects the person would have to develop to be able to navigate the entire path and achieve the state of enlightenment, which is its fruit. And just, I don't mean to put anybody on, to make them nervous or anything, but I'm curious to know if someone would ask you, what are the three principal aspects of the Buddhist path to enlightenment? What would you say? And if you have an idea of the answer, then just give one of them, and then that gives other people more of a chance to participate.
Renunciation.
Okay, renunciation. First one is renunciation. And I want to elicit a few remarks about renunciation, because I'm not a scholar in either Tibetan or Sanskrit. Anything I learned was through other people doing translation. But I do know that the term renunciation, what it actually means in the context of the Lamrim, is really quite different from what that word might be used to mean in ordinary English parlance. So putting aside what it means in the Buddhist context, what image comes to your mind when you think of renunciation? Or maybe nothing comes to your mind. Maybe that's not a word or a concept in your.
Denying anything material. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, the word, well, denying is a very strong aspect of what that term means. So I think like certainly growing up in America, and even though I wasn't brought up within a Christian household, of course, being American, you pick up a lot of things that come through Catholicism or Protestantism. And for example, there's a holiday, I'm sure you all know, in the season of Lent. And in Lent, one aspect of it is that a person denies himself or herself, or gives up, or renounces something. So what kind of things do people, and it could be you, maybe that's some tradition that you followed, or you could just be neighbors, or what kinds of things are renounced for Lent? For example.
There you go.
Meat, alcohol.
Yeah, it could be that, to give up meat for that period of time.
Sugar, pastries,
I'm sorry, Patty, I didn't hear that last thing.
sugar or pastries, that kind of thing, dessert.
Okay, sweets like that. So the things that are being given up, the things that are being renounced for that period of time, or to use the word that you said, an excellent word, deny, the things that the person is denying himself or herself, are largely foodstuffs, but the kind that we normally like, it's like a treat of some sort.
Right.
It's like let's say if it's a person who can't stand what kind of food can't some people stand? Some people can't stand spinach, right? So you can say, okay, for Lent, I'm going to give up spinach. Well, that's no big deal because you don't like it anyway, right? So basically you have to choose something that you gravitate towards, that you like, that you find pleasurable. Right? And so for the space of this period of time, I'm going to renounce this food that I like. Or it doesn't necessarily have to be a food, does it? For instance, during the period of Lent, some people won't go to movies. They might like going to movies a lot, but for this period of time, they won't do it, right? So for that period, what is being renounced, how renunciation is being practiced in that context, is to give up something that you like, that you normally like. But here, the term renunciation in this context has nothing to do with giving up things that you normally like. What does it indicate? What does this term mean? We still use the word renunciation, but we have to give it a totally different definition.
For me, it means giving up or denying negativity, harmful emotions and intentions, yeah, that kind of thing. And that's the same. It means the same to me in for Lent also. Actually, it's come to mean it's pretty much the same thing.
Oh. How is that the same? Because one seems to be giving up things that you like, and the other seems to be giving up things that are quite negative.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it's kind of a semantic thing, but just to think of, Lent as a time to give up hatred and harmful emotions and things like that. That's how I've come to see it.
Well, in that aspect, if that's how one looks at it, then that is very, very close, virtually identical, at least in part, to the definition that this term renunciation, this term normally translated as renunciation, means within the Buddhist context.
Right. I think my attitude there's been influenced by Buddhist.
Yeah. Very, very likely. Yeah. Does anyone want to add anything more to what the term renunciation within the Buddhist context actually refers to? Yes, please. I'm sorry, I'm pointing at you because your name is not showing up.
Can you
But
hear me?
now I can, but you were muted before, I think.
Yeah. The teacher we had on club referred to renunciation as spiritual, hear me? Spiritual determination.
Determination.
He was spiritual determination, was reframing renunciation in that context. So it was kind of odd, but he gave teachings related to that spiritual determination could be aligned with renunciation and or interchangeable.
And your voice was kind of cracking up. There must be something wrong, but were you saying, I couldn't completely hear, were you saying spiritual determination?
Yes.
Was that the term? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So yes, that word determination, if you took the Tibetan term, within it, one part of it actually means determination or a definite decision. So it's like when you say I'm going to do something, then you're determined. You've made a definite decision about it, and that is at the core of this term. I have to admit I've forgotten what the Tibetan term for renunciation is. It's locked in my memory, but I don't have the key to unlock it. So anyway, whatever that term is, I think it's nejung. Yeah, I think it may be nejung. So one of those syllables must mean determined, you know, to make a definite decision. But a definite decision to do what? Now, it's not a definite decision to give up chocolate cake or a definite decision to give up going to movies. That's what it would mean in the way, you know, in a very popular level, people practice renunciation of giving up something for Lent. They like going to movies, but okay, for this period of time, I'm going to make the definite decision, I'm going to give up going to movies. But within the Buddhist context, what is the definite? The definite decision is to give up what? Or if not to give up, at least to do something. I think all of you have a sense of what it is, but I don't mean to belabor the point, but it's really good to get an idea of what these terms actually indicate, because obviously these are things that we are meant to cultivate, and if we only have a vague idea of what it is to cultivate, we might really miss the main point, and especially when the translation that has become common is misleading. Yes, I'm sorry. I see two people raising their hands, but I can't call out your names because I can't see your names, and I have forgotten. One
Yes.
is
Do you renounce attachments or attachments to the delusions?
okay. Renounce attachment or attachment delusions. Yes, that's definitely an aspect of it. Anything else that you wanted? Anyone else wanted to add?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe you give up self-cherishing, but I'm not sure. I don't think I remember it very well.
Well, certainly in a spiritual path, self-cherishing is something which eventually has to be given up. There's no way of achieving any of the higher states on the Mahayana path if we don't give up self-cherishing. Okay, so that certainly can fit in there. Yeah, and yes.
The wrong view.
Say again, please.
I'm having problems with these earbuds. Wrong view.
Wrong view. You give up wrong view. Mhm. Yeah, all of these fit in to it. Yeah.
Oh.
So I'm trying to think of something that would encompass all of it. All of these things that have been mentioned on one level or another, the self-cherishing attitude, attachments, and so forth, they're all in the Buddhist analysis, they're ultimately the cause of suffering, right? They're ultimately what binds us to samsara. And here samsara just means this involuntarily going around and around, running after pleasure, but finding only disappointment. Okay? And so renunciation is turning one's back on that cycle. You know, I'm sick and tired of running after a pleasure. When I get it, it only lasts a moment. If I indulge in it too long, it turns into its opposite. It turns into pain. And then my ordinary habit is, okay, so the object, the pleasurable object wasn't pleasurable enough. So now, you know, I have to up the ante. Before I was running after, you know, an expensive car. Now I'll run after a helicopter or a jet, a Lear jet, you know. So this thought that the problem is that what we're attached to isn't quite good enough. And so we get into this cycle of wanting more and more and more. but the awareness that eventually dawns on the mind as we cultivate renunciation is that no matter what the pleasurable object is that we run after, that we're attached to, it's never going to give the peace and satisfaction and ultimate happiness that we're looking for. And once we come to see that and not just occasionally, but once it kind of wells up so that we don't find any ultimate pleasure in these objects, we realize that they're so limited. That's an indication that we've developed renunciation. So we've not renounced happiness. We've renounced that which keeps us trapped in this cycle of dissatisfaction. So the term that would be my friends who are translators who tell me this, because as I said, I've not studied Tibetan or Sanskrit to any extent, but a term that could be used as a much better translation of this term, Nejung, instead of renunciation, is definite emergence. Definite emergence. Okay. So definite is that decision. You know, you're not wishy-washy about it. I definitely want to do this. This is my determination. And the determination is to achieve or to emerge. Emerge. It means to get out of this repetitive cycle. And as I would say, my friends who are translators say that would be a very accurate translation of Nejung, the term which is ordinarily translated as renunciation. But definite emergence in English is a very clunky term, isn't it? It doesn't have any kick to it. But if we know what it means, if we know what it's indicating, it's very powerful. It is, isn't it? It's like being fed up with situation normal, because situation normal means that we're running after things and never finding the satisfaction or lasting peace or happiness that we're looking for. And so we decide it's like a rat race. I don't know whether the term rat race is used that much these days, but when I was a kid, which was, quite a long time ago, they talked about the rat race, like the people who live in large cities like New York, and they work in like the financial networks, and they're trying to work their way up the corporate ladder, right? But they never find any satisfaction there. It's very hard to achieve promotion, and when they do achieve promotion, then there's somebody else who can take it over from them, and they could lose it. Or even when they get the promotion, it isn't all that it's cracked up to be. And so then they switch jobs and they go into another industry, and lo and behold, they find the same thing. They're in that rat race, running on. There was a person who wrote a book, Treadmill to Oblivion. There's all this motion, but what does it lead to? Just exhaustion. Okay. So that's a kind of a working definition of samsara, the cycle of repeated unsatisfactory rebirths created by karma and delusion, fraught with suffering. So if you want to call it the rat race or this cycle of dissatisfaction, you can use any term you want, but that's what the person is renouncing. So it's really quite different, isn't it, from the way renunciation is ordinarily used. And so it's good to know what we mean, because otherwise, when we're practicing, we might be kind of giving up the wrong thing. Or we might not be going far enough. or we might think we're practicing when actually we're really not on the right path. Okay. Does that make any sense? What I'm saying? Yeah.
Absolutely, it does. Yes. It's kind of weird, the kind of difference between translation, between the Tibetan and the English, but yeah, it definitely makes sense.
Yeah, I was fortunate that a childhood friend of mine became an excellent translator, and he was always very interested in finding out what the terms that are being used, the Tibetan terms, what do they actually mean? What do they actually signify? And in some cases, they don't really signify what is really meant by the term. There is a I'm at this point, I might easily lose my train of thought. So when I find myself lost, you're going to have to remind me where I was when I lost it, because I'm thinking of an example, which maybe some of you have heard already. One of the most common phrases, even people who don't know very much about Buddhism, they know about the Four Noble Truths, right? That's pretty basic. What is Buddhism about? What does it teach? The teachings can be abbreviated into the Four Noble Truths. Well, that phrase, the Four Noble Truths, doesn't it sound as if the truths themselves are noble? That the word noble is modifying the truth. And so the first truth, the first of the Four Noble Truths, well, we all know what that is, right? The truth of
Babe.
Suffering.
suffering, right? The rest of you have to stand in the corner. Should have known that answer. Okay. The truth of the suffering. So if someone is told that the Four Noble Truths begin with suffering, then one can get an idea that suffering, since suffering is the very first of these four ones, that there's something noble about suffering, that's the meaning. And you could come up with an argument that there's something noble about suffering, like developing patience and not becoming despondent over it and soldiering through. That's a very noble attitude, right? But there's nothing noble about suffering itself. Putting up with suffering, that may have certain nobility to it, but it's not the suffering. It's not the truth that's noble. So why do they have the word noble in the translation? Because everyone uses it. It's been popular for as long as Buddhism has been known in the West. So that's about maybe 200 years or so. Everyone uses this phrase, the Four Noble Truths. So why do they use this word noble? You have an idea? I mean, maybe this is a very arcane point, but I think it's an example of how a phrase can come to be used, and yet the meaning that was meant by it has been lost or misunderstood. You have an idea? I'll give you a hint. India is the land of what tribe of people? Speaking about historically, about the people who came from Central Asia, made their way, across the Himalayas, entered into the Indus River Valley and the Ganges River, and brought with them a particular civilization, which eventually took root and became predominant in India. What were the names of those people? Do you have an idea? Did you ever read or study about these people?
Were they the Mongols?
No, that was a different group, and that was a group that you know, come from the Mongolian area of China and Russia, what are now China and Russia these days, and they were raiders who conquered so much of the world, and that was much later than the invasion of the people who came into India. That was a much later invasion. I'll give you another hint. I'm sorry for stringing you along like this, but I think maybe that's a way of getting a good understanding of where it comes from. Many centuries later, in fact, in the 20th century, when the did somebody want to add something? No. When the supremacist group of the Nazi Party in Germany, they borrowed many images from the ancient Sanskrit tradition. You know, like the swastika. The Germans, the Nazis didn't invent that. That was an ancient, very hollowed Sanskrit image.
Was it the Aryan race?
That's it. That's it. I knew that on that fishing exhibition, somebody would catch a trout. Right. So the Nazis called themselves, you know, the Aryans, the Aryan race. They related themselves to this, what they conceived of as these really pure, high class strata of ancient society, and that they were the Aryan people. And the word Arya can be understood to mean the noble one. So like if you have the run-of-the-mill population, and then you have the people who either through birth or merit or some other quality have risen right to the top, then they're the nobility. It's like they're the aristocrats, right? So these four truths are actually the four Aryan truths, the four Aryan truths. So they are the understanding that are true for those who have achieved this level of nobility. Now, we have to put the Nazis out of our mind now. We have to think of someone who is truly noble. And when Buddha was alive, in his day, there was a very, of course, very heavy caste system, which persisted for a long time. And the Buddha taught against that. He said, you don't deserve to be called a leader, an Arya or Brahmin, just because you wear a certain thread or you have certain emblems or that you were born in a certain way. It rather has something to do with your character. If you have a fully developed compassion and loving kindness and wisdom and ability, and your life accords with these very high standards of behavior and understanding, then you deserve to be called a Brahmin or a true Aryan being. Okay. And when his movement started, it was considered very extremely unorthodox because he accepted into it people who were very low caste or even outcast, which, you know, from in the Brahmanic tradition would not be possible. Okay? So Buddha was really very much of a radical in those days, and he himself didn't belong to the highest of the four castes, the Brahmin caste. He was a member of the of the ruling caste, which is the second highest. Whereas the priests of the Brahmanical tradition, they by and large, or they're meant to be coming from this higher caste, the Brahmin caste. Okay. So the reason I'm mentioning all of this is that that term, Arya, has reference to this higher class being. But in Buddhism, the higher class is not determined by who your father was, or what your occupation was, or whether you were a landowner, or whether you were born into this class or not. It is completely determined by how you develop these good qualities. So those qualities were what made you a real Aryan. Someone who just calls himself or is referred to as an Aryan just because he comes from a certain family, that's not a real Aryan, according to the Buddha. So what was a real Aryan, a real noble being, is a person who is following this path to enlightenment and is developing these qualities along the way, and especially in terms of the Mahayana path, has gone through the various bodhisattva stages, right? So that phrase, the stages of a bodhisattva, I think that's fairly well known, isn't it? If someone asked you what's a bodhisattva stage, you'd be able to give a fairly coherent answer to that, I think, right? Or not, I'm not sure. I don't want to frighten anyone here. What is a bodhisattva, for example?
Is a,
Oh.
Go ahead. Okay, I was going to say a person who is committed to developing his awareness and his compassion, so that to the utmost ability of his ability, in order to be of benefit to all human beings.
That's it. That's exactly it. It's a person who has, to go back to something that was mentioned earlier, it's someone who has given up this selfishness, this self-cherishing attitude, which it's all about I, me, mine, and instead is dedicating himself or herself to following a spiritual path so they can be of maximum benefit to others. In other words, a bodhisattva is someone who's developed the bodhicitta. The bodhicitta is the attitude of wishing to attain enlightenment in order to be of maximum benefit to others. Of course, we can benefit others whether we've developed bodhicitta or not. But the amount of benefit that a bodhisattva can give compared to someone who hasn't developed that attitude is far superior. So the moment that one really develops a spontaneous bodhicitta attitude, not just something which arises occasionally, but is really the orientation of one's life, one becomes a bodhisattva. And then there are 10 stages of being a bodhisattva, from the first through the 10th. And when you finally reach the 10th and last stage, then you're on the cusp of Buddhahood. Okay? And just to throw out another word, these bodhisattva stages, the word for that appears very, very often in Buddhist texts. Those are called the bodhisattva bhumis, Bhumi. Can I see by a show of hands how many people have heard that term, the bodhisattva bhumis? Yeah, quite a lot have. Okay. So there are some terms which have made their way so much into the language, into the teachings about Buddhism, that even someone who has never particularly studied Sanskrit know those terms. So bhumi is one of it, just means level or stage. Okay. So now here is something, this is probably a little bit too technical, so I'm just going to mention it briefly and you can tuck it away for future reference. At a certain point, progressing through these levels, through these bhumis, a bodhisattva develops a correct, non-conceptual, direct understanding of reality. You know, the wisdom of emptiness, the wisdom of shunyata. Before that, he or she might have studied it or gained certain ideas about it, but at a certain stage, that bodhisattva's realization of emptiness, of ultimate nature, of reality, of ultimate truth, becomes direct and non-conceptual. I mean, it's like the difference between someone telling you what ice cream tastes like, and you build up an idea in your mind, and then finally someone gives you a spoonful of ice cream and you actually taste it for the first time. So at a certain point in these bodhisattva bhumis, one develops this direct cognition, it's direct, non-conceptual. I mean, it's not through thought or ideas. It's as direct as tasting something. In the analysis of the bodhisattva bhumis, there's a stage called the path of seeing, means the direct seeing. Before that, one can gain a better and better and better understanding about emptiness, but it's still not direct. But at a certain point, the understanding becomes direct, non-conceptual, like tasting. That's the path of seeing. And that's where the term Arya specifically comes in the Buddhist teachings. They talk about Arya beings. They're talking about bodhisattvas who have developed a direct, intuitive, non-conceptual understanding of the nature of reality, of emptiness, of identityless, of ultimate truth. Okay, and those beings are given the title Arya beings. Now, such an Arya being still has certain stages to go through to familiarize himself or herself with that understanding, so it becomes, so it stays and deepens. But from that stage on to Buddhahood, the person is an Arya being. And that's my very long-winded way of saying why they're called the Four Noble Truths, or the Four Aryan Truths. Because it's not that the truths are noble, it's the truth that is seen directly by an Arya being. Right? So when one achieves that high level, the bodhisattva bhumis, the bodhisattva levels, where one has a direct understanding of the ultimate nature of reality, one is now an Arya being. And what dawns on such an Arya being's mind are these Four Noble Truths. The Arya being directly understands the nature of suffering, sees it as true. There's no longer any question about it. From the perspective of an Arya being, from the perspective of someone who's developed this understanding, the elements of the path are no longer conjectural. They're no longer something you have to study or understand from a distance. It's something you directly experience. And the same thing is true for the cause of suffering. An Arya being understands that the cause of suffering is grasping, attachment, having its root in ignorance. And an Arya being directly knows that there is a possibility to have a cessation of suffering, especially because having developed this high insight into the nature of reality, he or she has already banished certain levels of suffering. So knows from their own experience that it's possible to achieve the cessation of suffering. And then finally, the fourth noble truth of the path that leads to that cessation is a path which is built up, among other things, by the cultivation of renunciation, bodhicitta, and the wisdom of shunyata. So the phrase, the Four Noble Truths, it has become enshrined in Buddhist teachings, right? You see it everywhere. The actual phrase probably should be something like the four truths for noble beings. The four factors which are seen as true by Arya beings, by noble beings. But as the case with definite emergence, it's kind of clunky to have such a phrase. So instead, people just say Four Noble Truths. But it's very important to realize it's not talking about that the truth itself has something noble about it. It's rather truth that's something seen by someone who has a superior insight, who is an Arya being in that respect.
The space. You have to hold it.
So I'm so glad you explained that. Thank you for explaining that. Uh, Can you hear me?
Yes, I could, but it took me a while to see who was speaking. Sorry, now I see it. Thank you. It's
So-
Patty, right?
So if it's Adrian. So if I can,
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
okay.
Yeah.
So if I can, a short way for me to remember that.
Yeah.
Call it the nobles truths, apostrophe S truths, the nobles truths.
Oh, yes.
I just thought of
The
that. And I
nobles
thought
truth,
that will
yeah.
help me. That will help me remember that.
No, I had that had never occurred to me, but yeah, I just put a little apostrophe there.
Apostrophe
And
S.
Yeah, that's great. That's a grim. I like it when something from basic English grammar actually proves helpful.
Well, it helps me, I think, to
Yeah.
remember it.
No.
I
Hey,
may not, but
no, any trick like that that
Yeah.
allows you to skip over and avoid
Mhm.
unnecessary misunderstanding. There's a lot of necessary misunderstandings in Buddhism. There's a lot of concepts which are really difficult to grapple with. But this one is just simply a matter of putting an apostrophe in. And that solves the problem.
Well, thank you for explaining that. That really was very
Oh,
helpful.
it's my pleasure. It was quite an eye opener when it was taught to me. And was only taught to me because my friend was a student himself on quite a high level, even before he started studying with the Tibetans. So he knew a lot about the language. And then when he heard about the Four Noble Truths, it was within the context of a Tibetan teaching. And it became clear that calling them noble truths missed what the Tibetan was actually saying. It was indicating that you only saw these directly as being true if your mind was elevated to the point that you've gone through those boomies. Yeah. Otherwise, I never would have figured out for myself. And also, even our teachers, until they really became very conversant in English, which was not right away. Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche, in the beginning, even His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the English that they spoke, they self-admittedly, they said, was broken English. They still were able to communicate remarkably, but these kind of subtle points of language and translation, they didn't have enough English to see whether it was doing justice. They knew what the Tibetan meant. They weren't sure that the English words applying to it were were accurate or not. So it really required people like Thupten Jinpa and so forth, who had a complete Tibetan education, but also had a very advanced Western education, or other people like Bob Thurman, who studied at Harvard, and people like that. Then they were able to say, oh, wait a minute, maybe we should try a little bit of a different translation for this. You know, or at least if we still continue to use the old terms, at least know what it's meant to be. You know, so then you hear Four Noble Truths, and you don't have a mistaken idea, because you somewhere in the back of your mind you know it means something else. Okay. So we're most of the way through this session, and I've only touched on 1/3 of the things that we referred to last time. You know, of what the seat on which a Buddha is resting is a seat which is made up of a lotus, sun, lotus, the sun, and a moon, which stands for renunciation, shunyata, and bodhicitta. So those are the three principal aspects of the path. So I'm facing a little bit of a dilemma, because I might easily wear out my welcome if I go through all the rest of the things in such a slow, belabored manner, and never actually get to what I was going to talk about today, which was symbolism, specifically moving past the symbolism of the lotus, sun, and moon, the symbolism of making offerings, the offering balls. So let's pretend that we live in a democracy. That's what our political parties are always talking about, democracy. So I get the impression that very few of them have even the vaguest idea of what democratic institutions really are, you know. But it's something that you can wave the flag and saying, oh, we're being democratic this way. But I think that's a joke. So, oh, there I did. I knew I was going to do it. Completely derail my train of thought. So where was I going with this? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Ellie, no, you help me. Maybe you'll remind me much better than what I came up with. Eloise?
It was just the offering bowls.
Offering bowls, right. I have no intention of talking about offering bowls in the terms of their practical use. In other words, there is kind of a right way and a wrong way, generally speaking, of setting out the water bowls, how to fill them up, you know, how to dispose of them later in the day. And that really, I'm not very good at that myself. You know, my understanding is very rudimentary, but you really learn that kind of thing, if you haven't already, by a personal demonstration of it. So probably there are people in and around the Taos Center who have been trained in how to set up the water bowls. And then when new students come in, if they're interested in, making water bowl offerings, then those people can train them and can teach them. So that's not my interest here. My interest here is to indicate what these setting out water bowls, what it symbolizes. And there's a whole story I find it a very nice, very evocative story that explains by analogy, it explains what the purpose of setting out water bowls are. Now, before I get into it, have you heard any explanation of what this story is? I'll give you a hint. It makes an analogy between setting out water bowls and the way in ancient India travelers were greeted when they arrived at some place. Is that something that's familiar to you? Anyone? No? Oh, you've heard it, Eloise? Then you have? Okay. Okay. So there are different ways of telling this story, but I think it's very helpful. Okay. So we set up a shrine or an altar, sometimes it's called, and we may have on it images of a Buddha figure, pictures of our gurus, and so forth. But what we're doing is we're trying to set up a space into which we can invite the enlightened energy that we want to make connection with. Right? So we're trying to be hospitable, so that the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and these glorious beings, whether we can see them or not, will be invited into the space, because that's the space that we want to do the meditation in. And in the meditation, we want to make contact with loving kindness and compassion and wisdom and all of the other qualities symbolized by these Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, meditational deities, and so forth. Okay, does that make sense? That we're trying to create a sacred space, and we can see that that's important because many of our lives are very rushed and very busy, and it becomes important to carve out at least a small area. It doesn't necessarily have to be a whole gompa, but at least a small area which can be our place in which we can commune with these higher qualities. Okay? So we're inviting representatives of these higher qualities to come into our meditational space. So the analogy which is sometimes given is based on the way travelers would be greeted when they come to someone's home in ancient India. And especially, this is referring to how one greets in a most respectful way someone who is coming, who has the power of doing something for you that you want. Like, for example, maybe the person is a high magistrate in your area. So he knows a lot about the judicial system or has certain power in that sphere. And you have, let's say, you have a land dispute with your neighbor. So you really would like to have this magistrate be on your side. Right? That would be very, very helpful. Okay? So you invite the magistrate to come to your house, and he accepts the invitation and he comes. So how do you greet him? How do you greet him? And there are analogies to this in many, many different cultures. One analogy I'm thinking of is, I've not been to Hawaii. Well, I stopped at the airport once, but I've not actually been to Hawaii. But it's a very well-known custom that when you come, they give you a flower garland, a lei, around your neck. That's a way of greeting a guest like that. Well, in ancient India, there are very, very similar customs. But the first thing that you have to give someone who has arrived at your house, some honored guest who's arrived in your home, is water for rinsing their mouth, because the roads are very dusty and very dry. So the first thing they want is to be able to clean out their mouth and have a drink of water. And the second thing is water for washing, especially washing their feet and their shoes, because the dust has caked up on them. And anyone who's lived in India, in any even slightly rural area, knows how quickly things become dusty. You throw it, one's clothes, and so forth. Okay. So the first two water bowls are water for the mouth and water for washing, water for the feet. Now I'm using the example of 8 water bowls. There are some cases in which one has more than 8. Right? And in those cases, usually it's the first 2 bowls, the ones that actually are meant to be water, or at least symbolize water, which are multiplied. So you might have 2 water bowls filled with water, or you might have 4 or 5 or even more. But at least in general, there are 2. So as you look at the altar, the general order is that you place the water bowls out from left to right, but there are exceptions to that. And so the first and the second bowl on the left are actually filled with water. Now, all of the bowls might be filled with water, right? But at least the first 2 actually mean water. The other ones might be filled with water, but they mean something else, which I'll explain in a second. Right? But these first 2 are water for the mouth and water for the feet. Okay? Does anyone know, you have water for the mouth, water for the feet, what the third water bowl symbolizes? Again, it may be water or maybe some other substance, but it symbolizes something else. And actually, the example of Hawaii is directly related to this, even though Hawaiian culture and ancient Indian culture are separated. In this case, they're a kind of identical type of greeting. Do you know what the third
Is it
term
food?
is?
Food?
Could you say it louder? I couldn't hear.
Is it food
No, that's later. That's coming later.
or incense?
And that comes also a little bit later. Before all of those things.
Okay, I didn't get the third one.
Flowers.
Flowers, yeah, flowers.
Yeah, flowers, right? By the way, some people, when they make these offerings, it's very often it's repeated in a Sanskrit phrase, so you can actually learn the terms that are used. So like the first 2, argam, pajam, then pupe, dupe, like that. Those are my bad pronunciation of Sanskrit terms for these offerings. Okay, so the third one is for flowers. So if we take Hawaii as the example, a garland of flowers, or in India, it's very, very common to greet someone with a flower offering, or to put flowers around their neck, a garland. That's very, very traditional. And then the fourth, the fourth one after that, anybody know what it is? Actually, someone mentioned it before, but it was a little out of order.
That be the incense?
Incense, yes. Yeah. Flowers, incense. Also, you can't learn this from me because I don't know it that well, but all of these offerings have gestures. So water for the mouth, water for the feet, flowers, incense, they all have gestures. And depending on which level of practice you're doing, the gestures may vary somewhat. Okay. So you have water for the mouth, water for the feet, flowers, incense, and then the fifth one The fifth one can be presented as a water bowl, but very often the fifth one is not a water bowl, it's something else. And so it kind of appears pretty much in the middle of the row of offerings. Can you think or imagine what that's like by looking at an altar, like maybe where you are? What's right in the middle? It's generally speaking not a water bowl. It's another offering.
Would that be the offering of light?
Light, yes, exactly, light. So traditionally, here let's use the Tibetan example. The Tibetans like to light candles made out of butter. They had a lot of butter, so they burned butter. So they had these receptacles filled with butter with a wick in them, so it resembled like a candle. And that was their light offering. But it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be that. It could be, you could have an electric light, or you could have a little lamp, like maybe a kerosene burning lamp. But anything that produces light, that's the next offering. Now we have, if I haven't lost count, we have 3 left. We have water for the mouth, water for the feet, flowers, incense, light, and now the last 3. What might these last 3 be? What do you think the next one is?
It's perfume.
Perfume. Something that gives a very nice smell, and something that you can anoint the body with. You know, like fragrant oil. And here, an example that we can think of, you know, if we want to connect with it, if connecting with ancient India doesn't ring our bell, maybe something from our own culture will. So, for example, there's a very famous account in the Bible of Jesus being invited into a house, and what they did was they rubbed aromatic oil into his hair and onto his shoulders. Right? Maybe you remember that from reading, or if you had a background in church or so forth, then this was how an honored guest was treated, by giving them something aromatic, something nice, something that could rub into their hair or into their body. Or in a word, perfume, you know, scented oil or perfume. So that's the next offering. That's the 6th one. So now we have 2 more left. And one of them has already been mentioned.
That would be food, I think.
Yeah, that's food. That's food. And the gesture in you're doing this with hand gestures and sort of, that gesture is like you're holding a tray, a tray of food presenting. It's like that. Okay, so food. And now I'm going to kind of shift to the 18th century, you know, the time of Mozart. A lot of the music that he wrote were for entertainment of nobility. You know, like Eine kleine Nacht music. These were serenades that were played while the high and mighty were having their meals. So as they were being presented with all this great food, what was happening in the background? Mozart's music was playing. He wrote music for those events, to play on those occasions. And so the last offering is music. So you've invited this honored guest, and you've made the room in which he or she is going to be received as pleasant as possible. You've made that person comfortable by enabling them to wash out their mouth and take a drink and wash their feet, and you bedecked their body or the area around with flowers and nice smelling incense. You've set up lights. Then you've anointed with fragrant oils or perfumes, and now you present a meal, and then the meal isn't complete until music is playing. Okay, so this is kind of the most honored way that you could receive a guest in so many different cultures. And then once this honored guest has been wined and dined, we still even use that expression, don't we? Even if you're not giving anybody wine or much in the way of food, to give someone hospitality is often referred to as you're wining and dining them. Whether or not you actually give them, you know, some nice wine or not, you are, figuratively speaking, wining and dining them. And then, having done that, you're in a position to make your request. Now, you could, I guess, consider all of that as a bribe. I think that's a kind of a little bit, what's the word? A little bit of a cynical way of looking at it. It's not really a bribe. Maybe the bribe is happening under the table at the same time as these things, but it's just a way of showing hospitality, of welcoming a guest. And then what comes after that is a request. And so it might be a rather mundane legal matter. You know, my neighbor wants to build his wall here, but that's actually on part of my property. I want him to build it over there, you know, something like that. And so, having wined and dined this magistrate, there's a very good chance that he's going to rule in your favor. Okay, that's just human nature. So all of that is analogous for inviting the enlightened beings, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, meditational deities, and so forth, but inviting them into your presence and giving them everything that would make them honored, showing the best hospitality, showing your genuine interest in wanting to please them so that you can make your request. But here, the request, generally speaking, is not, you know, I want to win a court case. What is the request? What request are we making of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas that we invite into our meditative arena?
To bestow blessings upon us.
Right, to bestow blessings. And that's a very interesting phrase, to bestow blessings, right? I think as we look into what bestowed blessings mean, and this is not such an easy thing to parse out, it indicates that there is qualities that person has, you know, the guest, the invited Buddha, Bodhisattva, and we want to partake of those qualities. So if we're inviting a Manjushri into our space, and we're going to do a meditation Manjushri, the main thing we're trying to cultivate is one of the many forms of wisdom. There's mundane forms of wisdom, there's supra-mundane forms of wisdom, there's the wisdom of composition, the wisdom of reading, the wisdom of understanding, the wisdom of speaking. All these things are different aspects of wisdom. The highest form of wisdom is the wisdom that understands the true nature of reality. Okay? But there's many other forms of wisdom leading up to it. And so if we're inviting Manjushri, it's probably because there's a reason that we want to specifically cultivate this quality of wisdom. What other quality from what other meditational deity might we want to develop as part of our meditation practice?
Tara, green Tara,
Say again, please.
green Tara.
Well, that's the being, but what quality does she have that you want to develop?
Wish fulfilling, wish fulfilling,
Yeah.
being obstacles.
Yes. Yes, you want to call on that power to remove obstacles to gaining whatever it is that you need. Ideally, obstacles to gaining spiritual realization, or obstacles to long life. Okay. So Tara fundamentally represents what is sometimes referred to as active compassion. Okay. Compassion is the wish to help others overcome their suffering, and Tara is the one who not only has that wish to help others, but actually has the energy and the power to help them gain those qualities. If you're thinking of pure compassion itself, just the wish, even though all the Buddhas have all the qualities, if you try to think of what their specialty is, like a doctor's specialty, then the one whose specialty is just the compassionate wish that beings overcome their suffering, that's fundamentally represented by Chenresi, Avalokiteshvara. Right? That's the represented in many different forms. The two most popular are the four-armed ones, 2 arms at the chest, holding a wish-fulfilling gem, and then a rosary and a lotus in the other 2 arms. Or these arms can multiply, so you have 1,000 arms, and so those 4 arms are in the center, and then there's all these other arms which reach out and compassionately to all other beings with what they need. So there's a very, very lovely a legend of how when before his attainment of full enlightenment, Chenresi, Avalokiteshvara, was a bodhisattva trying to cultivate these qualities, and he had such unbearable compassion. That's a phrase that Kabji Lama Zopa Rinpoche used to use all the time. Unbearable compassion. He had such unbearable compassion that when he thought of how beings were suffering, he just had to send out as much energy as possible for them to overcome that suffering. And he did it by reciting the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. Yeah? So he recited millions and millions of Om Mani Padme Hums and visualized sending all of these waves of light. And when his meditation was over and he rose from it, he looked out and he realized, well, he had helped some people, but there were still so many more who were still caught in suffering. So he burst into tears, just at the realization of how much suffering there was in the world, and how, despite his strongest effort, he was still only able to help a small fraction of them. Okay, so he burst into tears, and then the tears, and this is like a scene from Alice in Wonderland. The tears were so copious they formed a lake, and out of the lake appeared this goddess. This was Tara. And Tara, born from the tears, the tear-born lotus, that's part of the praises to Tara. One of them is the one born from the tears of Avalokiteshvara. she appears in front of Avalokiteshvara, born from his tears, and says, "Don't cry. I will put your compassionate intention into action." So she took upon herself the burden of providing the means and the method and the power to bring about as much compassionate activity so that it doesn't remain just a wish. Oh, how I wish people were happy, how I wish they were free from suffering, but actually do the things that were necessary to bring it about. So in that respect, sometimes Tara is called active compassion. Had you heard of that story before? Any of you? That's actually one of my terms of what we might call Buddhist mythology. I think it's one of my most favorite stories like that.
Thank you.
And
for that. Thank you. I didn't know Tear-Born Lotus, that was the story behind it. That's wonderful to know that. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure. I love that story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. Let's see. Oh, we've reached the last minute, and I had a few more things to say, but this is okay. This is okay because this allows me to indicate that next time we meet, we can pick up from this point. Just as a few more words to tell about the story, and then there's a way of tying all of this together back to the water bowl offerings. So the water bowl offering kind of set up the request, right? And then we have an idea that beings like Tara and Chenrezig may be the ones that were making the request too. But then there is a way of seeing how all of this is a transformation as a way of getting past the cause of suffering, which is, as we were saying before, that this running after sensory objects of desire, more this, more that, feed me, better car, nicer things to drink, nicer clothes to wear, that it's our attachment and grasping to those things which just perpetuate suffering, right? But now I think we've gone enough so that we can see how all of this can tie together into a magnificent transformative practice. So that's the tease for next week. All right. So you people have been very, very patient with my long-winded stories. And there'll be more next week, but hopefully next week it will tie this together, because that story of inviting someone a guest to your house as an understanding of what the water bowl's offering is something that I heard right in the beginning when I was first a student many, many, many years ago. Actually, it's almost embarrassing. It's like a half century ago. You think I'd know more by now, but kind of lazy. But there's another story that I only heard very recently. I think the first time was just a couple of years ago. It was a way of explaining the symbolism of the water bowls in a completely different way, but something that fits in with it, And it's very instructive, because I don't know if this has happened to you, but it's happened to me on a number of occasions, is I'll receive a teaching and it'll give an explanation, and then some time will pass, and then I'll be at another teaching, and the Lama or the teacher, Eastern or Western, will be explaining, the same thing, and we'll explain it in quite a different way. And we tend to be kind of chauvinistic. So the first thing we hear, we think, okay, that's the right way. Any other explanation must be the wrong explanation. That's completely not the case when it comes to Tibetan Buddhism. You discover that almost everything has many, many, many levels of meaning and interpretation, and they're all right. So they all can be understood in a context. They can all add to one's knowledge. So this way of understanding the water bowl offerings that I'll try to offer next week is a completely different approach, but eventually it comes to the same point. The important is that it communicates something meaningful to us. So I want to thank you. And also I want to offer something. I hope I can offer it. I think everyone has access to my email address. And if you don't, you can get it very easily. John has it and Eloise has it. It might happen that certain questions come up or certain things that need clarification of something that I may have said, maybe not too clear, or somehow questionable, or something tangential may have come up. I can't guarantee that I have an answer for any question you have, but I'm very, very happy to receive your emails with those questions or comments. Right? Because at the very least, what it gives me is an idea of what's going on in your mind, what really interests you. Because I'm definitely not like our lamas who can just read your mind and know what you're thinking. You know, I don't have that ability at all. So it really helps for me to hear what you're thinking of. And then maybe I've heard something which I can pass on that's helpful, or maybe it's something that I myself have to research a little bit more, or maybe it's something I simply have to admit I just don't know. Okay, but I know a lot of people find it helpful to try to put their questions into writing, even into a short email, because in the process of doing that, it clarifies their own thinking. And that becomes the basis for being able to really ask questions of teachers who are qualified to give answers that are not just textbook answers, but something that can go straight to the heart. Okay. So
Just wanted to let people know your email is located in our Big Love newsletter. So anybody who would like to communicate with John, go ahead and take a look at Big Love, and it's toward the end of the communication.
okay, thank you.
Thank-
Very often at different centers and different groups, there's a certain procedure that they follow for starting a session and certain prayers or procedures for ending a session. But I don't want to do all that now. We've used enough time. I just simply want to generate a thought, and you're welcome to join in it in whichever way you'd like. That if there's anything that has proved to be beneficial by any of the things that have been said or thought by any of us here, that we may be dedicated, and especially in these days, the most significant dedication is that through our practice and understanding of the Dharma, fulfilling the wishes of our lamas, that our lamas who are alive have long life, and those who have shown the aspect of passing away, and of course I'm specifically thinking of Kabji Lama Zopa Rinpoche, may, in response to our sincere wish to continue studying the Dharma under the aegis of such an extraordinary spiritual master, then the karmic result of that may be that he returns in a easily recognizable form, so that he can take off that he can continue from where he left off in his matchless activities to bring infinite, unimaginable benefit to all the beings with whom we interact, and that in the future we ourselves may be able to receive teachings from his incarnation, just as we were fortunate enough to receive teachings from him in the life that is now past. So I think if we make, in our own words, with our own thoughts, a dedication, something like that, I think that would be very, very nice, very, very meaningful. Of course, it can be done together with actual prayers, long life prayers, all kinds of things like that. But I think in this case, it's something that comes up from our own heart, based on our experience of studying and practice under the guidance of such a teacher as Kebje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and we related to what's really in our heart, what our true wishes are. That kind of prayer, I think, has great power to it, even if it's not traditional. It doesn't have to be in terms of a specific prayer that was composed, some 100 years ago or something like that. If it comes from our heart, then it's a real prayer. So I want to thank all of you for your kindness and for your tolerance. And I apologize for being so long-winded. And just to repeat that if it may not be a question that you have, it may be a suggestion. It may be something that you would like me to go over in future talks, or maybe something about my style of teaching that you think could be improved, or anything. I'm certainly very gratified to receive that kind of communication from all of you, and then I would do my best to try to fit in as reasonable a response as possible, if not to the person who asked it individually, at least into the group when we meet again. Okay?
Thank you,
So,
John.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thank you so
John. That
much.
was wonderful.
Thank you.
So much. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Absolutely wonderful.
I'll see you next week. I hope.
Forward.